Hello and welcome back, everyone. We are now about 20% through our syllabus, as you would have finished the first unit and the first 5 chapters, and I hope we are making headway in our preparations. And today we will focus our attention to the next unit in our syllabus called Human Resource Management, or HRM. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of what HR is supposed to do, I just wanted to give you guys an overview of what to expect when we're going through this unit. Okay? Now, since the name itself is Human Resource Management, we understand that it has to do with the labor side of the business. You will remember labor from being one of the resources of the business, without which you can't produce, you can't serve. So it's an extremely vital part of a business. And making sure that you have the right people in the right place, in the right mindset, is what the HR department is supposed to do. Now, I've also discussed it before that the 4 units starting from 2 to 5, HR, marketing, operations, and finance, are the 4 basic departments or the 4 functions that every business would have. And HR then is that side which makes sure that they're bringing in the right people and they're giving the opportunity to the right people at the right times. And we also know that employees are everywhere in a business, right? When I say that, I mean every department. Marketing would have its people, HR, its own, finance, its own, and of course, marketing, its own employees. But making sure that they're all feeling motivated, they are getting paid fairly for the work they're doing, and they're also developing within the business is the responsibility of the HR department. So it's not just one thing that HR looks after. They will give you a chance to grow. They'll give you promotions. They'll give you a company car should you deserve it. So there are many things that HR is involved in when it comes to the employee side. And HR also provides an important function for all the other departments. For example, since HR is at the core of everything employee related, let's say the marketing department needs to change their employee. Maybe someone's not been performing. It's not the marketing department responsibility to do that. Marketing will contact HR and they will make sure that the right person is brought in for that position. Let's say operations needs to be restructured. Somebody is leaving and we need to promote someone. That's also something that HR will make sure that it's happening in a fair manner, moving people up the corporate ladder. Let's say finance needs to hire somebody. They're short of people. The recruitment side, bringing people in, hiring is also done by HR. So from bringing people in to the point that we're feeling satisfied and keeping a good work-life balance, everything is done by the HR department. So let's hope we all understand what the scope of the department is. And now we will move on towards the first chapter in this unit called Management and Leadership. Now, one of the key components of the HR department is to make sure that they have the right managers in place. So people who can get things done, who know how teams work, who have a clear idea of how to make sure that everyone is working towards a common goal, which is what we call leadership. So, sure, managers have to be leaders, but that's just one of the activities that they have to perform. And we're going to look at what other things that they're responsible for as managers when they're given a certain position. Now, before we get deeper into what exactly managers are supposed to do, I just want to take you back to a concept that we learned in chapter 4 called hierarchy of objectives, as you can see it right here. And what we learned was that a business will have its long-term aims, where they want to be in 10 years, 15 years, but they will not be achieved until unless they have broken it down into corporate objectives, yearly objectives that businesses have to achieve, which then are broken down into individual departmental objectives and then are broken down into employee targets. Now, people who decide the aims are surely the owners, the long-term directors of the business. People who decide the corporate objectives, the every year business objectives, are the employees of the business. And these guys would be the CEO, the head of the departments. And what are they doing? The CEO is the manager of the entire business. Marketing, head of marketing would be the manager of the marketing department, and HR, the HR department, so on and so forth. So when we are trying to understand what the business is supposed to do, a manager plays a crucial role in giving their input as to what the business objective should be. And whatever that objective is, they will then have to translate that into the individual departmental objectives. And again, that's where the role of the department head comes into play, who's the manager in this situation. He has to explain to his particular department how will they contribute to the overall corporate objectives. So let's say it's marketing, and the head of marketing will say, okay, you make sure there's more promotion this month. You make sure there is more research. You make sure the product has better quality. So breaking down those corporate objectives into individual employee targets will be done by the manager of that department. So at every stage of the most basic function of a business, setting objectives, a pivotal role is played by the manager, which is, of course, first understanding what the objective is and make sure that the whole department and everyone working under that manager has the required resources and the right skill set to go ahead and help the company achieve their objectives. So what are managers doing? What are they supposed to do? How is their performance evaluated? They'll be performing many functions. And first of all, and what we've just learned through a hierarchy of objective is they are responsible for setting the objectives. So whatever the departmental objectives would be, they will be broken down into individual employee targets. That's what the manager is doing in that instance. Now, once those employees or those departments are given their objectives, then they have to figure out what type of resources do we need. For example, if it's the operations department, you know that they're going to need a place to work, a warehouse. They know they're going to need skilled labor, a little bit of machinery. So they have to make sure that they have all the required resources in place for all the employees to achieve their targets. And that's what a manager is doing. On top of that, a manager is in a position of leadership. He will have multiple people who are reporting to him or her, and it's one of the jobs of the manager to make sure that those people feel satisfied and motivated to come and work harder for the business. So one side of it is making sure everybody understands what they're supposed to do, and while they're trying to achieve their objectives, they're also having fun, coming to work with a positive mindset. Also, as we discussed in the very first slide, the manager is responsible for dealing across departments. So if marketing needs something from HR, the manager will be the link, not individual employees or with any other department. So they have to make sure that all departments are aligned and working with one another on the same corporate objective. And finally, the only way you get promoted is if you perform. And it's the manager who looks or who assesses an employee's performance, whether they're up to what the expectation was. If they're not, do they need training? Do they need advice? Do they need a warning? Those sort of decisions will be taken by the manager. So it's quite a large scale as to what any manager has to do, whether they are a CEO or maybe the head of the administration department or the head of kitchen services, for example. Regardless of the position, the functions remain the same. They'll be giving objectives. They'll make sure that the workers have the required resources to achieve those objectives. They also feel motivated to achieve those objectives. Of course, motivation is a very basic instinct of people, and workers, HR has to do with people. Coordinating activities, and finally making sure that whoever's worked hard, whoever deserves a promotion, deserves an increment in their salary, gets it fairly. There are functions of a manager. Now, throughout HR, we're going to come across a number of different theorists who've had their say on the various matters on HRM. And when it comes to this chapter, there are 3 theorists that you should be aware of. First of those is Mr. Mintzberg. And Mr. Mintzberg had a theory on the functions of a manager. And he says that in total, there are 10 things that all managers have to do, 10 roles that they must perform regardless of their position in the hierarchy of the company. And he divided those 10 roles into 3 categories. He said that 3 of those roles are of an interpersonal category, 3 of roles are of informational, and 4 roles are of the decisional category. We'll start off with interpersonal roles, and there are three different types of interpersonal roles, namely figurehead, leader, and liaison. And a manager will be performing all 3 of these roles, just in different times, in different capacities. And let's start with the first one, figurehead. As a manager, when you perform the role of a figurehead, you're sort of like a symbolic leader of the company. You will be representing the company in, let's say, you have a new factory opening, you are presenting something to the government, maybe a new product's being launched and you want to say something to the customers. So this is someone who is a symbolic leader. That is the role of a figurehead, and all managers will have to perform this. Number 2, leader, of course, is someone who's able to motivate people to work towards a common goal. And since all managers will have multiple people working under them, they need to show their leadership qualities. And we'll look at leadership in more detail in a later video in this chapter. Liaison. Okay, now the word liaison simply means to facilitate. And as a manager, you must facilitate or coordinate activities between the different departments of the business. So, for example, if the operations department manager, let's say the factory manager, needs more labor to double their production, they will need to coordinate or be the link between operations and HR so that HR can bring in the people that operations require. So they need to be that link. That is the role of a liaison. Okay? So those are the interpersonal roles. Number 2, or the second category, is that of informational roles. And informational roles are monitor, disseminator, and spokesperson. Okay. Now, as a monitor under the informational role, what you're supposed to do is make sure you're keeping an eye on what's happening outside of the business that might impact the business. Okay, so things in the external environment, changes in consumer patterns, changes in the economic condition, currency rates going up and down. So making sure you're collecting data that is relevant to the business, that is the role of a manager. So if you're an operations manager, if you find out about some new technology that might improve your own production process, that's something that they should be monitoring. Disseminator. Okay. The word disseminate means to simply sort. Okay. And making sure that whatever information you had collected as a monitor, you're relaying it to the right people in the organization. So let's say the government says we're going to increase the taxes on companies. That's something that's happened in the external environment, and the manager must make sure that that information is relayed to the finance department of the business, because they will be dealing with that. So if the CEO reads it, or if a CEO gets a notification, he must sort it out and forward it to the right department. Disseminator. And finally, within of informational roles comes that of a spokesperson. Okay. Now, of course, spokesperson is a public figure, someone who will represent the company and speak on behalf of the company. So let's say if the government calls them in for a fine or a court case, the manager will go and perform the role of a spokesperson. Or let's say you have to raise more finance and you want to give a presentation at the annual general meeting of a public limited company. That's where the manager will be speaking as a spokesperson on behalf of the company, explaining the profitability of the business. So it's all about collecting information and distributing information to whoever needs it, the different stakeholders within the business, under the informational category of Mintzberg's 10 roles. Finally, we come to the decisional roles. And there are 4 decisional roles that all managers have to perform, starting with being an entrepreneur. And you remember entrepreneur from our very first video together. An entrepreneur is someone who takes the risk, who innovates, who is hardworking, who will never take no for an answer. So all those qualities must be exhibited by a manager, since they are in a business that is essentially an enterprise. So it requires the input from all managers, their entrepreneurial skills, in order for the business to collectively grow. Disturbance handler. Okay, now this obviously does not mean that you're going to stop fights. Okay, yeah, HR is about people and no, shouldn't be fighting, but it's this disturbance is the sort of disturbance that might hurt the business. For example, let's say COVID, right? We all felt when the pandemic hit, that was a disturbance that literally put a lot of businesses on the brink of closing, and so many did close down as well. So before you get to the point of closure, the manager should take notice of this and try to find ways to counteract those threats. A similar example would be, let's say, a competitor opening just down the street from you. That's a disturbance in your external environment, and until and unless you make a point of addressing it head on, it's going to hurt you in the long run. So disturbance handler keeps an eye on things that might impact a business negatively. Number 9, resource allocator. This one's easy to understand. Resources are land, labor, capital. And as a manager, you've got to decide within your department who gets what share of the labor, the capital, and things. So let's say, being the CEO, you will have an X amount of money to spend each year. Let's say that's 100 rupees. He will decide what proportion goes to which department. And let's say this year operations needs a bigger budget because the raw material is becoming more expensive. So they will give more budget to the operations department, and that's the decision they're taking as a resource allocator. Maybe marketing needs more people, so we will move more labor from one department to another. So making sure that the right combination of resources are available to everyone is what the role of a resource allocator is. And finally, negotiator. Okay, of course, everybody wants to get a nice deal out of things. Everybody wants to feel like they're the king of bargain, right? So in any way, when you're dealing with outside stakeholders, a manager should make sure that the business gets the best deal out of that situation. Negotiate a good price, get the maximum in return for it. That's the role of a negotiator as a manager. So in total, 10 roles. Mr. Mintzberg is very clear on what each of these roles mean for a manager, and they will all be performing these different roles at different times depending on what the current situation is.